My name is Carol Emerald, and this is not the life I imagined for myself. For 30 years, I poured every ounce of love and trust into my marriages, upholding his dreams, standing by his side, and believing in the promises we made. It wasn't for glory or recognition, just devotion. But the loyalty I gave wasn't enough. One evening, my husband stood before a crowded room, his voice echoing with pride as he declared, "To the woman who has my heart." Except, he wasn't talking about me. With his arm wrapped around another woman, he confessed his love publicly, shattering my world in an instant. There was no apology, no shame, just the brutal truth laid bare for everyone to see. I walked away from that room with my heart broken and my pride fractured. I thought the betrayal was the end, but it wasn't. What followed was worse. Secrets surfaced, lies unraveled, and the man I thought I knew revealed just how deep his deceit went. But I wasn't going to let him win. He thought he could humiliate me, take everything I built, and walk away unscathed. He was wrong. This story wasn't about the heartbreak he caused, it was about the revenge he'd never see coming. Call to action. Drop your city below, we want to see how far this story has reached. I stood motionless on the slick pavement, the cold rain seeping through my coat, my grip on reality slipping with each icy drop. The bouquet I had carried so carefully now lay abandoned in the street, petals strewn like remnants of my shattered trust. My fingers trembled as the words on my phone screen glared back at me. Local theater star Samuel reunites with his first love after 40 years, an emotional, heartwarming moment. Heartwarming. For who? For them, maybe. For Autumn, who stood at the center of Samuel's attention. For the audience, who cheered for a reunion they thought was pure and beautiful. But for Meath, woman who had silently, dutifully stood in his shadow for 30 years, it was anything but. I tightened my grip on the umbrella, forcing myself to step away from the chaos of the news notifications. The cab driver had long since pulled away, and I was left stranded on a street corner, the rain washing away what little resolve I had left. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, but every inhale was a knife of betrayal. My husband had promised me a moment to shine, to finally acknowledge the life we had built together, and instead, he handed that moment to her. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Samuel's assistant. "Amelia, I hope you're okay. Samuel's been caught up in the reunion with Autumn. It's a huge success. Maybe it's best if you sit this one out tonight." Sit this one out, as though my marriage was a mere detail to be brushed aside for his theatrical triumph. Through the haze of my thoughts, a memory surfaced, a conversation from 2 months ago. Samuel had been pacing the living room, his enthusiasm infectious. "Amelia," he had said, his eyes bright, "when the play premieres, let's tell everyone. About us. About our marriage." I had been stunned, overwhelmed with joy. After decades of invisibility, Samuel was finally ready to share our life with the world. I had taken out the blue dress he had given me when we got engaged, pressing every crease, imagining how radiant I would feel standing by his side. But now, as the rain streaked down my face, that promise felt like an illusion, a cruel joke played on my hope. I didn't know where to go. Home felt suffocating. The theater felt insurmountable. The only place I wanted to be was somewhere far from the reality crashing down around me. My phone buzzed again, a local news outlet featuring yet another clip of Samuel and Autumn. This time, she was holding his hand as they gazed at each other under the spotlight. The headline read, "An inspiring love story spanning decades, Falling Leaves premiere touches hearts." I clicked the video, unable to stop myself. There he was, me husband, glowing under the spotlight, his smile wide and unrestrained as he looked at her. Every movement, every word was meant for Autumn, not for me. I let the phone fall to my side, my breathing shallow, my chest tight. What was I? An afterthought? A footnote in his real love story? For 30 years, I had been the steady presence, the anchor, the one who sacrificed everything to keep his dreams afloat. And now, I was nothing. The rain grew heavier, and my umbrella barely held against the wind. I clenched my fists, forcing the bitterness in my throat back down. This wasn't how my story was going to end. I wouldn't let it. If Samuel thought he could erase 30 years of marriage with one heartwarming reunion, he was wrong. The betrayal I felt was a fire, and it burned brighter with every passing moment. Just then, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a headline or a message, it was an email. The subject line read, "Falling Leaves ticket confirmation." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. The ticket had been booked weeks ago, a front row seat, reserved for me by Samuel himself. My mind raced. He wanted me there, at least. He had wanted me there when he still planned to share our story. Now, that ticket felt like an invitation to witness the destruction of everything I had built with him. But maybe it was also something more. Maybe it was my chance to take back control to remind him, and everyone else, that I wasn't just a shadow. I closed the umbrella, letting the rain soak me fully, washing away the hesitation that had gripped me for hours. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of his reckoning. For 3 days, I wandered through the empty halls of our home, every corner filled with the echoes of a life I thought I understood. Samuel had stormed out, leaving behind a stack of damning photos, accusations that twisted the truth, and a question that refused to let me rest. How had I let it come to this? Each step I took was heavy, the weight of 3 decades pressing down on me. 30 years spent cooking meals, ironing shirts, scheduling appointments, and erasing parts of myself to fit into Samuel's world. 30 years spent swallowing rumors about women, dismissing the soft tug of doubt, convincing myself that love meant sacrifice. But the truth was finally clear. Samuel's world had no place for me. The 4th evening, as the sky faded into deep shades of violet, I heard the door creak open. Samuel stepped in, his posture weary, his gaze hesitant. He looked at me, sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the television illuminating my face. Normally, I would have stood up immediately smiling, welcoming, asking if he was hungry. But this time, I stayed where I was, unmoving. My silence hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "What's for dinner?" he asked, forcing a casual tone. "Smells amazing." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Samuel's idea of amazing had long been tied to steak and lobster at high-end restaurants, not the carefully prepared home-cooked meals I slaved over for years. His words, once a source of pride, now felt hollow a habit, nothing more. I looked at him, my voice steady yet sharp. "Samuel, do you even like the food I cook?" His brow furrowed, caught off guard. He chuckled nervously, reaching for my hand. "What's this about? You sound like a jealous 20-year-old. I withdrew my hand before he could touch me, my gaze unwavering. "Where did you go after the play's opening night?" Samuel's smile froze, his charm faltering. He loosened his cuffs, his tone deliberately casual. "Yeah, I know I told you we'd go public that night. But you were late, so I had my assistant call and tell you not to come. Then, well, I had urgent matters to deal with. I didn't have time to explain. That was my mistake. Let's not fight over this, okay?" His words were rehearsed, his excuses predictable. If this had been any other time, I might have let it slide. I might have convinced myself that a marriage required patience, that Samuel's career was worth the sacrifices. But not this time. I repeated calmly, my voice firm. "Where did you go after the play, Samuel?" He finally looked at me, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Amelia, are you seriously checking up on me now? We're not kids anymore. Can you stop acting like this?" Acting like this. That phrase echoed in my mind as I reached for the stack of photos I had printed over the weekend. Social media screenshots, news articles, candid photos, all of them, capturing the same damning reality. One by one, I laid them on the table, watching as Samuel's gaze darkened. The images showed him stepping off stage, walking side by side with Autumn to a nearby restaurant. They ordered red wine, her favorite, shared a lavish dinner, and in one photo, Samuel leaned in to kiss her cheek. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't throw a fit. I simply looked at him, the man I had stood by for 30 years, and repeated his own words back to him. "We're not kids anymore. Can you stop acting like this?" Samuel's polite mask slipped away entirely, his face twisting with anger. He grabbed the photos, flipping through them rapidly, his jaw tightening. "Amelia, you had me followed?" He slammed the pictures back onto the table, his tone sharp and defensive. "Autumn and I were just catching up. Why do you always make a big deal out of nothing?" And with that, he shoved his chair back, stormed out the door, and left nothing but silence behind. I stared at the closed door, my chest tight, my mind racing. Why is it that some people can do wrong and still be the ones who lash out in anger? Why do they get to shift blame, turn the tables, and leave the ones they hurt questioning themselves? More importantly, why had I let it go on for so long? The days that followed blurred together. Samuel didn't call, didn't text, didn't come home. I didn't check my phone, didn't leave the house. The photos sat untouched on the coffee table, a reminder of the betrayal I could no longer ignore. For 30 years, I had lived in Samuel's shadow. But now, as the silence stretched on, I realized one thing with painful clarity. It was time to step into the light. The silence in the room was heavy as Autumn stepped into my home, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She exuded the same polished confidence I had seen in the photos, the silk scarf draped perfectly around her neck, her makeup immaculate, every detail tailored to perfection. It was infuriating how effortless she made it all seem. She glanced around briefly before turning to face me, her small smile faltering as she took in my expression. "Amelia," she began, her voice soft but carefully measured. "Thank you for letting me in. I know this is unexpected." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Unexpected? Not quite. Bold, though, I'll give you that. Her smile twitched, but she held her composure. "I wanted to clear the air between us. I know things might look bad." "Might?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. My tone was colder than I'd intended, but I didn't care. "You've been standing in the spotlight with my husband, Autumn. Tell me, how exactly does that look to you?" Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she pressed on. "Samuel and we've always had a connection. It's hard to explain, but it's not what you think." I pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. "You've always had a connection? Is that what you call it? Stepping into my life, into my marriage, and taking what doesn't belong to you?" Autumn hesitated, her polished exterior beginning to crack. "Amelia, I didn't come here to argue. I just wanted to say that I had no intention of causing harm. Samuel reached out to me, and—" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Of course he did. Samuel always knows how to spin his tales, doesn't he? But here's the thing, Autumn. You may have been his past, but I was his present for 30 years. I built a life with him while you were off living yours. And now, you think you can waltz back in and pick up where you left off? How convenient." Her confidence faltered entirely, and for the first time I saw guilt flicker in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. "I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't realize that walking into a theater and handing flowers to a married man under the spotlight might be hurtful? You didn't realize what your little public spectacle would do to me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I don't want your excuses, Autumn. What I want is to understand why you think you're entitled to any of this." Autumn looked down, her composure crumbling. "Because he told me he was unhappy." Her words hit me like a slap, her voice barely above a whisper. Not because they were surprising, but because the spark was gone that he long feared. Trapped. Samuel had not just betrayed me physically, he had betrayed the sanctity of our shared life, the trust we had built, the sacrifices I had made. I took a step back, shaking my head. "And you believed him? You believed the man who kept his marriage a secret for 30 years? You thought he was being honest with you?" Her eyes met mine, glossy with unshed tears. "Amelia, No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." I walked to the door and opened it wide, gesturing for her to leave. She hesitated, her eyes pleading. "Amelia, please." "We're done," I said sharply. "Take your guilt, your flowers, and your whispers of nostalgia, and go. You wanted Samuel? You can have him, but don't think for a second that you've won." She stared at me for a long moment before finally nodding, her shoulders sagging as she turned and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her, and with it came a wave of unexpected relief. For years, I had lived in the shadows of Samuel's ambition, tethered to a man who valued appearances more than authenticity. But as I stood there, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a shield, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I walked back to the bedroom and glanced at the suitcase on the bed. The blue trench coat lay neatly on top, its vibrant hue a stark contrast to the muted tones that had defined my life for decades. I smiled faintly, running my fingers over the fabric. Tomorrow, I would be on a plane to Colorado, stepping into a life where I wasn't defined by someone else's dreams. For the first time in 30 years, I was living for myself, and it felt extraordinary. Samuel had left early for his rehearsals, leaving the two of us facing each other in the living room like adversaries preparing for battle. Autumn lifted the cup delicately, blowing on the surface with an air of practiced grace. "Samuel's assistant mentioned that you two were planning to announce your marriage on opening night," she said, her tone laced with mock sympathy. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt your plans." The glint in her eye betrayed the truth. This was no apology. She was enjoying this, reveling in my humiliation. I kept my expression neutral, a faint smile playing on my lips, and said nothing. Autumn set the cup down gently, leaning back against the chair with an air of self-satisfaction. If Samuel had told me about it last month, I wouldn't have shown up that night. Such a coincidence, isn't it? My stomach dropped. Last month, Samuel had known she was coming all along, and yet he hadn't mentioned it to Manad a single word. Instead, he had made excuses, kept me away, lied to my face. That night on stage, Autumn had declared to the audience, "These flowers should have been given away 20 years ago." I hadn't understood the weight of those words at first, but now, sitting across from her, it was crystal clear. For the longest time, I had believed Samuel had carefully chosen me, loved me, valued me. But now, I saw the truth. I wasn't chosen out of love, I was chosen out of convenience. Autumn swirled the tea in her cup, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. "Amelia, don't blame Samuel," she said lightly, her words like poison wrapped in silk. "He's always had me in his heart." She lifted her cup again, taking a slow sip as if savoring her victory. "You were just the right persona, one who happened to be there when he needed someone." Her words were effortless, casual, like she was simply stating a fact rather than twisting the knife deeper. I stared at my own untouched cup of tea, the bitterness rising in my throat. And then, a quiet laugh escaped me. I looked directly at Autumn, my voice calm and steady. "For decades I gave Samuel everything," I said, my words deliberate. "Not because I couldn't live without him, but because I thought he was worth it. I thought he deserved my sacrifices, my devotion, my trust." Her gaze flickered, the self-assurance in her eyes faltering just slightly. I tilted my head, letting a small, amused smile curl across my lips. "But now I see it clearly. He's nothing more than a weak, selfish man. And for that," I added lightly, "I should really thank you, Autumn, for taking out the trash." Her composed expression cracked for the first time. She opened her mouth as if to retort, but no words came. Instead, she gave a tight, forced smile, grabbed her purse, and stood abruptly. "Goodbye, Amelia," she said curtly, and without waiting for a response, walked out the door. I watched her leave, her polished figure disappearing down the driveway. The house seemed lighter the moment she was gone, as if her presence had been a suffocating weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. This ridiculous farce, this charade of loyalty and love, was finally coming to an end. I grabbed my suitcase and took a deep breath, my decision made. On the entryway table, I left a single document, a signed divorce agreement. No note, no explanation, no farewell. If Samuel wanted to sign it, he could. If he didn't, it didn't matter anymore. I was done waiting for his approval, his affection, his crumbs of reassurance. I had given him 30 years, she had taken the man. Now, I was reclaiming what was left of my life. The moment I stepped off the plane in Colorado, I spotted Harper waiting at the exit, her excitement radiating like sunlight. As soon as she saw me, she broke into a run, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Mom," she exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "It's only been a few years, but why do you look like you've aged so much?" I froze, instinctively raising a hand to my hair. The glass window behind Harper reflected my image back at Mimi, once thick. Dark hair now streaked heavily with silver. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. I hadn't aged suddenly. I had been worn down, little by little, year after year. Harper seemed to realize her words had been poorly chosen and quickly corrected herself, looping her arm through mine with a bright smile. "No, no, Mom. You're not old at all, you're just tired. Give it some time. Once you relax, you'll look younger than ever." I nodded, letting her take my hand and lead me outside. The golden hues of the setting sun stretched long through the airport glass, casting a warm glow over us. For the first time, the warmth in my palm didn't feel like a burden, it felt like freedom. Harper took time off to show me around Colorado, introducing me to a world I had never known. We stayed in a cozy cabin nestled in the mountains, wandered through meadows covered in wildflowers, and gazed at the endless stretch of snow-capped peaks. One afternoon, as we sat by a quiet lake, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine trees, I picked up a camera for the first time to capture meals or schedules, or anything for anyone else, but simply to hold on to these moments. Harper's carefree laughter, the light filtering through the trees, the reflection of the mountains on the water. For the first time, I felt truly alive. Samuel was about to learn that some secrets refused to stay buried. At first, no one had questioned the carefully curated image he had built with Autumn, the romanticized story of two souls finding their way back to each other after 40 years apart. It was the kind of narrative that charmed the masses, painting their reunion as destiny. But the cracks in their fairy tale began to grow. Sharp-eyed social media users started piecing together details, their curiosity sparked by Autumn's own post a photo of her holding hands with Samuel, captioned with poetic musings about love and time. To most, it seemed harmless, even beautiful. But to a few, it raised questions. Who was this man who had once been so elusive about his personal life? Who was the woman he had spent decades with before Autumn reappeared? And then, the digging began. Jack's social media accounts were combed through, his scattered posts providing breadcrumbs that led to the truth. A family vacation photo from years ago. An old post wishing both his parents a happy anniversarismal. Seemingly innocuous details that didn't fit the narrative. Samuel and Autumn had been selling, the truth unraveled like threads pulled from a tapestry. Soon, the headlines shifted. Samuel Porter's hidden marriage exposed 30 years of deception. Behind the curtain, the woman who gave everything and was erased. The comments, once glowing with admiration, turned into a frenzy of outrage. How could he keep a secret like that for so long? This isn't love, it's selfishness. Imagine sacrificing your whole life for someone, only for them to pretend you never existed. Autumn, too, was pulled into the chaos. Once celebrated as the muse of Samuel's greatest works, she was now seen as complicit in his deceit. Her poetic captions and wistful smiles couldn't shield her from the backlash. People began questioning her integrity, her role in erasing a woman who had given everything for the man she loved. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of Harper's mountain cabin. The drama played out on screens and in headlines, but for the first time, it didn't touch me. I had walked away from that life, from that man, and every revelation was just confirmation that I had made the right choice. Across the kitchen, Harper was glued to her phone, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the latest updates. "Mom, this is insane. People are finally seeing what you went through." I smiled faintly, stirring the batter for blueberry pancakes. "Let them talk, Harper. It doesn't change anything for me." She frowned, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You should say something, Mom. People are standing up for you. Don't you think they deserve to hear your side?" I turned to her, my expression calm. "Harper, I spent 30 years living in someone else's shadow, trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. I have nothing to prove anymore. My side of the story is the life I'm living now." Meanwhile, Samuel's life was unraveling faster than he could control. His fans, once fiercely loyal, were turning their backs. The endorsements and partnerships he had built his career on began to vanish, one by one. The theater community, once his haven, grew cold as his name became synonymous with betrayal. And then, there was Autumn. Their once picturesque love story was crumbling under the weight of reality. The nostalgia that had drawn them together wasn't enough to sustain a life built on fractured foundations. One evening, as Harper and I were tidying up after dinner, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakable. "Amelia, I've made mistakes. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before placing the phone face down on the counter. Harper glanced at me, her curiosity evident. "Was that him?" I nodded, my voice steady. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her tone cautious. I met her gaze, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Nothing. There's nothing left to say." That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The chapters of my life with Samuel full of sacrifice, heartache, and quiet endurance were finally closed. I had stepped into a new story, one where I was the author, and the pages were filled with hope, freedom, and self-discovery. The world could debate Samuel's actions, dissect his choices, and argue over his legacy. But for me, the only legacy that mattered was the life I was building now, surrounded by the people and the places that brought me joy. I stood holding the umbrella over Samuel and Jack, shielding them from the storm. But I wasn't protecting them anymore, not from the truth, not from the consequences of their actions, and certainly not from the choices they had made that led us all to this moment. I looked into Samuel's eyes and saw the regret swimming there, deep and unspoken. Jack, standing beside his father, shifted uneasily under the weight of my silence. The boy I once held close, the son I had fought for through sleepless nights, was now struggling to understand the person I had become, the mother who would not yield. "Mom," he said hesitantly, his voice tight with frustration. "We're family, Dad and I. We came here to bring you home. We're trying to fix this." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, their emptiness echoing louder than the rainfall. Then, I finally spoke, my voice steady, calm, and resolute. "Go home, Jack," I said. "Go home, Sam. I've built a new life here. I'm not the woman who silently stood behind you anymore." Regret flickered across Samuel's features, his lips parting as though he wanted to say something, to plead his case, to turn the tide. But no words came. Instead, the silence stretched between us like a chasm that could never be crossed. Jack's expression hardened, his confusion and anger barely concealed. To him, I was unrecognizable enough, the mother who had always bent, always understood, always forgiven. But I had no more forgiveness left to give. I closed the umbrella, allowing the rain to soak them as it soaked me, and turned my back on them. Harper, who had watched the entire exchange from the doorway, hurried to my side, her eyes shining with admiration as she followed me inside. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from the children at the community school I had donated to after the divorce. Their handwriting was crooked and filled with the innocence of youth, their words brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Amelia. Because of your donation, we have new books and study materials. Every day we can't wait to rush into the library, eager to read more stories and learn more knowledge. We will study hard and grow into people who make a difference in the world. We will never forget your kindness." I placed the letter carefully on the table, the sincerity of their words bringing tears to my eyes. Harper, standing beside me, looked down at the letter and then at me, her face soft with understanding. "They're lucky to have you," she said quietly. I smiled faintly, brushing a hand over the fresh white bedsheets we had hung to dry in the sunlight earlier that week. They smelled clean, new, full of possibility. And as I folded them, I knew with certainty that my life had turned a new pagine that no longer included Samuel's story. But Samuel's life was moving in the opposite direction. Shortly after his visit to the inn, his health began to fail. Years of exhaustion and mental stress had taken their toll. Jack had returned to school, leaving Samuel alone in the city, his care entrusted to a professional caregiver. Autumn, the woman whose presence had once electrified his world, had vanished. She continued attending social events, her flawless facade intact, posting photos of gatherings and dinners with friends on social media, unbothered by Samuel's decline. For decades, Samuel had stood at the peak of his career, surrounded by admirers and accolades. And now, he lay in a hospital bed, alone, his fame reduced to whispers. When I returned to the city for a meeting with a charitable organization, I heard about Samuel's condition. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to stop by and visit him, not out of pity, but to finally close the chapter in my heart. I found him pale and gaunt, his once bright eyes sunken with exhaustion. The man who had once commanded rooms with his charm and confidence now lay weakly in bed, his frailty a stark contrast to the vibrant memories I had carried of him. When he saw me step into the room, his face lit up with surprise and hope. "You came to see me," he said, his voice trembling. "You must still have feelings for our marriage, right?" I stood by the edge of the bed, watching him quietly. The years of devotion, the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given, all of it flashed through my mind. But there was no anger, no sadness, no longing, just clarity. "Sam," I said softly, "I'm not here because I expect anything from you. I'm just passing by." Disappointment flickered across his face, the hope fading from his eyes. After a long silence, he asked in a strained voice, "If that day at the curtain call I hadn't been with her but was waiting for you on stage, would we have ended up like this?" I shook my head gently, my voice steady. "Sam, the problem wasn't in that phone call. From 25 to 60, my life revolved around you. I gave up my career, my dreams, and dedicated myself entirely to taking care of you and the kids. But did you ever make the same sacrifices for me? You're always like this, only realizing the value of something once it's gone. But life doesn't give second chances, and that question has no answer." I stood, preparing to leave. Samuel's eyes were filled with reluctance, his hand twitching slightly as though he wanted to reach out and stop me. "Amelia," he said quietly, "will you come see me again?" I smiled softly, my tone firm yet kind. "Sam, our lives have already gone in different directions. I'll wish you well, but I won't come back." That was the last time I saw Samuel. Years passed, and our paths remained separate. His story, once intertwined with mine, was no longer part of my journey. And as I stood on the balcony of Harper's Inn, watching the sun set behind the mountains, I felt a deep sense of peace. Samuel had made his choices, and I had made mine. And for the first time in my life, those choices were entirely my own. For years, I had been tethered to expectations. a silent presence in a life shaped more by duty than desire. Every decision, every sacrifice had been for someone else, for Samuel, for Jack, for the idea of a family I wanted so desperately to keep whole. I had folded myself into their lives so seamlessly that I had nearly disappeared. Yet here I was, standing tall, surrounded by a life I had built for myself, free of their shadows, free of their demands. The memories still stung, though the pain was different now, a dull ache rather than the sharp cut it once was. I thought of Samuel's words, his regretful pleas, and Jack's insistence that I return to the life I had left behind. "You're too old to start over," Jack had said. "Aren't you afraid of becoming a joke?" But instead of anger, I had felt nothing. Not bitterness, not sadness, just an overwhelming sense of clarity. It was strange, feeling this kind of peace. For decades, I had been so consumed by the needs of others that I hadn't even known what peace truly felt like. Now I did. It was Harper's laughter filling the kitchen as we baked pies from scratch. It was the smell of sun-dried linen and the sight of wildflowers blooming by the lake. It was a silent morning with nothing but my own thoughts to keep me company. Still, there was an undeniable weight that lingered when I thought of Samuel. The man who had once been my whole world now felt like a fading chapter in a book I had outgrown. His regret, his illness, even his attempts at redemption, they no longer had the power to move me. I had let go of him in a way I hadn't thought was possible, and in doing so, I had reclaimed myself. But there was also something bittersweet in that realization. For so long, I had defined my worth by what I could give, how I could care, how I could serve, how I could support. It wasn't until I stepped away from all of it that I began to see the worth in simply being. I wasn't just a wife, a mother, a background character in someone else's story. I was Carol Emerald, and I was enough. On the night of Samuel's play premiere, I wasn't in the audience. I was at home, sitting in the warm glow of the living room, Harper's laughter echoing softly in the background as she talked about her latest project. My phone rested on the coffee table, the screen showing a live stream of Samuel's opening night. I didn't plan to watch it through, but curiosity had its way of pulling me in. On the screen, Samuel stood under the spotlight, his voice steady but laced with regret. "I want to thank someone," he began, his gaze flickering with emotion. "She quietly sacrificed decades of her life for me. When I was at my lowest, she was by my side. She gave up her future to take care of our home and our children so I could focus on my career." This play is a reflection of the past, but it's also a hope for the future. I hope it reminds us all to cherish those we often overlook. I leaned back in my chair, my silver hair catching the light. It was ironic, wasn't it? Samuel's gratitude, his moment of revelation, came only when it no longer mattered. The story of the woman in his play, the sacrifices she made, was mine. He had turned my life into his art, seeking absolution through his work. But there was no catharsis for me in his regret. There was no vindication in his words. Harper, ever intuitive, grabbed my hand and smiled. "Mom, you're the leading lady in that play," she said, her tone playful but tinged with sincerity. I chuckled softly, my fingers brushing over hers. "Maybe, but I don't need the spotlight to feel like the star of my own story anymore." As the play unfolded on the screen, Samuel's figure slowly blurred as he walked off stage, swallowed by applause. I turned off the live stream, the phone screen fading to black. "Mom, you're not going to watch it till the end?" Harper asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. I stood, crossing the room to the window. The deep blue sky stretched endlessly above, dotted with stars that glimmered like fragments of hope. "No need," I said, a faint smile on my lips. "I've already seen what I needed to see." Harper joined me by the window, her arm brushing against mine. "So, what's next for you?" I turned to her, a playful glint in my eyes. "I'm thinking of learning to paint." Her eyes widened. "Paint? That sounds amazing." I nodded, the corners of my mouth curling upward. "It's something I've always wanted to try, but I was always too busy. Now, I think it's time." She laughed, her joy infectious. "I can't wait to see your masterpiece." A few days later, I enrolled in a painting course at a local art studio. The first time I held a brush in my hand, my fingers trembled slightly, unsure, unsteady. But as the hours passed, I found myself immersed in the world of colors and lines. The paint flowed freely, each stroke a release, a reclamation of the time I had thought was lost. On the final day of the course, I painted a sunflower. Its petals were open, reaching toward the sunlight, vibrant and full of life. The teacher walked over, his gaze thoughtful as he studied the canvas. "Your work is full of life," he said, his voice warm. "Just like you." I smiled, gratitude swelling in my chest. As I packed up my supplies and stepped into the sunlight, I felt a sense of lightness I had never experienced before. The warmth on my skin, the scent of freedom in the air, it was all mine. Life no longer felt like a series of obligations or sacrifices. It was a canvas, waiting for me to fill it with color, with joy, with possibility. And Samuel? He had his regrets, his lessons learned too late. The world could debate his story, dissect his redemption, but I no longer lived in his shadow. His chapter had ended, and mine was only beginning a life painted in vivid hues of independence, happiness, and hope. The possibilities stretched endlessly before me, as vast and uncharted as the ocean I planned to paint next. And for the first time in decades, I knew without a doubt I was exactly where I was meant to be.